Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So today we're going to continue the series. Is that an analog in your pocket? Are you just happy to see me? And today we're going to be talking about cores from MiSTer FPGA that are not going to be seeing ports on Analogue Pocket due to the size difference in the FPGA chip. Because I keep seeing a lot of comments and getting a lot of questions when we're going to see certain cores ported to Pocket. And I kind of want to just talk about why some of these things are not going to be seen on an Analogue Pocket 1.0. And it's very likely we'll never see a second Pocket. You never know. Analogue might want to make exclusive FPGA consoles for the following three things that aren't going to be coming over. But right off the top, Sega Saturn, even though the core is not done, is not going to be coming to Analogue Pocket. The Sega Saturn was a very complex piece of hardware with two CPUs and VDP 1 and 2, and the amount of logic it takes on MiSTer FPGA practically fills up the entire amount of logic elements available to MiSTer FPGA developers. And while it'll be absolutely awesome to get a Sega Saturn core on Analogue Pocket, and I get a ton of questions, this is just something that isn't going to be feasible. In a few moments I'll get into the technical reasons why, but I get it's a total bummer that you're not going to be playing something like Sega Saturn on Analogue Pocket. And I think maybe not many people understand just what logic elements are and why they are important, so I'll go into that a little bit as well, because like I said, I get pretty much at least a dozen questions a week asking when we're going to see these cores ported over. And do be aware the Sega Saturn core isn't even finalized yet, so it's not like a port would occur even until that was done. But the thing about the Sega Saturn is there's a lot of silicon you need to replicate in FPGA gates, and every single chip is going to take its own footprint within the amount of logic elements. You need to think about this like a 10-gallon bucket of water. If you've got 10-gallon capacity and you're trying to put 15 gallons in, it just isn't going to fit. And that is the situation when you build the cores in whatever software development kit or otherwise tool set you want to use. In this instance, Cordis. There is fitment for all of the logic elements and the pathing and tracing, just like there would be if you actually designed a chip and manufactured it as a tangible object. So something like Sega Saturn right now is at like 92% capacity of the FPGA chip on MiSTer FPGA, and you do have to have a little bit of overhead. You can't go to 100% of any chip, or else you may see some slowdowns in the end. So honestly, Sega Saturn, just so you guys know, is not coming over to Analogue Pocket. I wish it would. Maybe if there's a Pocket 2.0 with a stronger FPGA chip, it could be possible. You will just have to wait and see. Now, as far as what I mean by logic elements and fitment, you're going to see here that the Analogue Pocket specs show the exact two FPGAs within the device. We have one Altera Cyclone V with 49,000 logic elements, and it is a Cyclone V on MiSTer FPGA as well. And you also have a smaller Altera Cyclone 10 with 15,000 logic elements, giving you a total of 64,000 LEs. If we move over to MiSTer FPGA in the DE10 Nano board, the MiSTer project obviously uses that. You're going to see that we have that Intel Cyclone V, but it has 110,000 logic elements. That's getting really close to double the logic elements that the Analogue Pocket has. So unfortunately, that's where you run into problems with Sega Saturn. It's also going to be the exact same situation on something like Nintendo 64. Robert or FPGA Zoomspas, the developer of the core, towards the end of active development, even though he's tweaking the core right now, was saying that the FPGA was basically filled to capacity. So again, we go to that 10-gallon bucket analogy. If you have a 10-gallon bucket on Analogue Pocket, MiSTer FPGA is using like an 18-gallon capacity. There is just no way to port this down to Analogue Pocket and actually make it function. You'd have to remove so many essential items that it wouldn't be a Nintendo 64. It would just be something that crashes and doesn't function whatsoever. And that is really what FPGA technology is. It is just a tool set and a capacity for you to recreate whatever you want inside of it. It isn't magic. You can't snap your fingers and make it work, even though FPGA gaming does feel like magic sometimes. So that's just really the situation. Even the best coder in HDL and Verilog out there couldn't take something like the Nintendo 64 core that basically fills up the capacity of 110,000 logic element chip on MiSTer and bring it down below 64,000 logic elements. There is diminishing returns when you try to get efficiency, so even if this core was absolutely coded perfectly, it is just a situation in which it cannot fit. It's not even going to get close. And while that is a bummer, it really does say that obviously Analogue has plans for this stuff in the future. It's no surprise that they're releasing a standalone Nintendo 64 FPGA console, and it may be very likely that they developed the Analogue Pocket knowing that it couldn't run a PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, or Nintendo 64 core, because they may very well in fact have plans to release standalone FPGA consoles for all of those devices. Obviously, their Turbo Duo FPGA was their proof of concept showing that they could load games in from compact disc, which would be Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1, and cartridge loading they've been doing for years. So obviously, Analogue is going to be releasing this Nintendo 64 standalone console, so maybe after that happens you may see something like a Pocket 2 bringing a stronger FPGA to the party so you could do portable gaming like this, because obviously MiSTer FPGA is going to very shortly have at least one handheld from Taki Udon, so you are going to be able to play something like Nintendo 64 on the go on MiSTer FPGA, and I do think that's going to be a very big driving factor as to what Analogue's plans are for the future. But leave me a comment down below and tell me so far, Nintendo 64 or Sega Saturn, if you could snap your fingers and create magic and make it fit on Analogue Pocket, which of the two consoles would you choose? For me, even though I love the Nintendo 64 and Bomberman Hero is one of my favorite games of all time, I'd have to make the magic happen for Sega Saturn because I just love it that much. But it will be interesting to see when Analogue shows some more information on the Nintendo 64 console they have in development, because that might be a fun time as well for the original cartridge format people out there. Now moving over to the PlayStation 1, this is another core that is just going to be too large and complex for the capacity of the FPGA chip on Analogue Pocket, but of the three, this one I believe has the smallest footprint even if it is over 64,000 LEs. And honestly, getting PlayStation 1 really started the 3D revolution on MiSTer FPGA. Robert or FPGA Zoomspas made both PlayStation 1 as well as Nintendo 64, and SRG320 did the Sega Saturn. And we even have stuff like full light gun support for PlayStation 1 games with a lot of different options, and that's been amazing to see. Because before these cores existed, 3D and FPGA as far as gaming was concerned wasn't really something that we had, and it would be great to see what Analogue would do on a standalone PlayStation 1 console, because again, I really feel like the Turbo Duo FPGA console they released was kind of testing the waters to do a compact disc based console in FPGA, because if they can do Nintendo 64, they can do PlayStation 1 and they can do Sega Saturn, because obviously we know those work in FPGA already. We play them on MiSTer FPGA all the time, and I think people would really actually like a PlayStation 1 that read discs in FPGA more than any other console, because PlayStation 1 lasers are notoriously fickle, and it's one of those things, more often than not, your PlayStation 1 probably doesn't read some if not all discs, where the Sega Saturn seems to be way more robust when it comes to actual longevity. And there's a metric ton of fun games to play on PlayStation 1, and this is why I do hope that Analogue does a Pocket 2 in the future, something in the 115,000-120,000 logic element range, so we could have potential ports of all of these consoles over to a handheld. I do think that if Analogue is going to make those consoles, they definitely wouldn't give you an open FPGA portable that could handle them until they had basically sold a console to everyone who would want one. Their business model definitely is trying to make money, so I don't think they would give open FPGA developers the ability to do it before they had their own crack at it. But it would be fun to see. Now of course it isn't just the PlayStation 1 core, even higher test is going to be the Turbo 2X PlayStation 1 core, which is going to up the clock speeds, giving you a better experience in games that have uncapped frame rates. This is definitely something well beyond the means of Analogue Pocket, obviously, if the stock PlayStation 1 core is. And even if you remove all of the turbo elements and all of the other enhancements visually to the stock PlayStation 1 core, it still sits above what would be capable on Pocket, let alone the fact that obviously you don't have analog controls, so it would be more of a situation where you'd want to play in a dock with an analog controller than anything else. But this is the type of stuff that I do hope Analogue focuses on in the future. Obviously they've been doing FPGA recreations of consoles. You have stuff like the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis, and Mega Drive. It is now on to them to probably move to the 32 and 64-bit generation with stuff like PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, as well as obviously they are doing Nintendo 64, and hopefully they get all three of those consoles done so we have FPGA replacements that take original media under our shelves and in our TV stands, because none of this hardware is going to last forever. And on the PlayStation 1 side of things, the disk drives are absolutely finicky by this point in time, and I'd love to see what they can do on the enhancement side as well, because on Robert's side on PlayStation 1 we can do so many amazing things with the PlayStation 1 core. Go full 16:9, remove dithering, get rid of the color banding, anything you want really. but I know I get a lot of questions. When is the PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64 core coming to Analogue Pocket? And my answer is, it just isn't. It's a pure technical reason. It isn't because developers can't make it happen because of a talent or lack thereof. It is specifically because the FPGA inside of Analogue Pocket just isn't big enough to fit them. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below and tell me, of the 3 consoles you saw right here, which one would you love the most on Pocket? But short of that, we're done. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.